I mean, she's absolutely right. I think right now the only other thing I'll say is that today you can see across that there's a concern about a second dip in our economy. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of businesses right now, many of you are in the room, I've already talked to you, that are talking about, hey, we've been able to hunker the storm. But you know what? Our resources are running dry. And we're not seeing anything out of Washington that's working. More than that, everything that's coming out of Washington is not working. It's doing the exact opposite. It's causing more harm. And if we don't get change, an immediate change, then those that are hunkering the storm and are best positioned to start moving forward are now going to start to fall behind. And that's the fear that I have if we don't start getting good, strong, experienced leadership in business to Washington to start taking these stands.
Ms. Roby, do you agree our tax system needs changing? Would you support a repeal of the 16th Amendment and the institution of a fair tax, sometimes called the national sales tax? If not, how would you change the revenue system?
Well, first and foremost, let me say that we absolutely have to have tax reform in this country. There is no question. We spent almost $500 billion in compliance cost alone last year. Whenever we penalize something, we're going to get less of it. And we are penalizing work in this country. Now, I absolutely believe that we need reform. And we need reform that is fairer and flatter and simpler. And I have said, and I stay committed to working with people like John Linder in the fair tax to make sure that we come up with the appropriate reforms. What I would like to add on to that is say, one thing that I know in my experience, certainly in my legal education and in my experience practicing law and in my experience problem solving on the Montgomery City Council, is that there are always more than one solution to any given problem. And when we elect people to represent us, we elect them to go and listen and find the solutions. And so what I would submit to you is that there may be more than one right answer to the question of tax reform. And we need individuals who are willing to go to Washington to represent us that can work with people like Congressman John Linder and others who have put in so much work to creating real reform in our tax system. But I also would submit to you that because we have such a progressive tax system where we have so many different rates that we could not only diminish those classifications of rates, we could lower taxes altogether. And that, again, is a simpler tax system, much less complicated than we have now. But I commit to you that I am absolutely committed to tax reform, and it must be at the top of our agenda because you just both heard us talk about jobs. And again, I submit to you that our current tax code is stifling the creation of jobs, and it is keeping people from wanting to work because we are penalizing work.
Mr. Barber.
To really have the discussion about tax reform, one must really understand in all the ways that our current tax code not just hinders individuals and hinders businesses, but how it hinders the economy, and also how it fuels the corruption in Washington, D.C. And what we need to look at is how much our current tax code is absolutely a tool. It is a tool that our elected leaders use to manipulate the system, to punish those they want to punish, encourage those that they want to encourage, put favors in place, and it fuels the corruption in our system. It makes our products uncompetitive on a global scale because we have too high of a tax burden in place. It reduces the amount of money that all of us can bring home because we have this thing called take-home pay versus how much we really earn. And there's only one answer at the end of the day on what tax reform answers all of those questions, and that is the fair tax. And the fair tax is absolutely a platform that I'm running on. I'm an educator on the fair tax. And I look forward that once I get to Washington, D.C., I can start putting the milestones in place and continue John Linder's efforts to start making that the number one choice for tax reform. Because without it, we can try to simplify the tax code as much as we want, but we're still not going to solve all the other underlying problems that are generated from having an income-based tax problem or income-based tax system that we have today. And I think it's very important that we put it on someone in Washington that understands all these. And I promise you again, nobody understands this closer and better than a small business owner who lives within that tax code every day. We spend almost $500 billion a year just to comply with our tax code. Imagine if we had $500 billion going back into our economy just by simplifying it. Imagine if we had no tax burden in all of our goods and services that we produce that could now make us on a more global competitive scale. Instead of shipping jobs offshore, we'd be shipping jobs onshore, because we would become the #1 place to be a manufacturing haven for businesses, because we'd have zero tax burden until the point of retail sale. So I absolutely support repealing the 16th Amendment and implementing the fair tax, and I promise you more than that, I will help educate and sell the fair tax, more than just being an adopter on the list of those that quote support it.
Again, I would just submit to you that I am committed to tax reform. We all know and we all agree in this room that the system that we have in place right now absolutely doesn't work. As I've stated before, what is happening is we are seeing a tax code that penalizes work, and especially right now, we need to be doing everything that we can to lift up the business owner, to give them incentives to create jobs, and certainly not to be passing legislation or supporting legislation that stifles it. So again, I remain committed to real tax reform that is fairer, flatter, and simpler.
Those were the easy questions. Which two federal government departments, for instance, the Interior Department, the Defense Department, Secretary of State, which two would you vote to eliminate? And give us 2 reasons why you would eliminate the 2 that you choose. Ms. Roby, it's yours first.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to answer this question, and I think the first and most important thing to say is that without a doubt, we have waste throughout our government. There is no question. We spend and spend. We're spending money that we absolutely cannot afford. And I think the very first department that we need to look at is the U.S. Department of Education. They have become... The U.S. Department of Education continuously hands down unfunded mandates that is harming us at every level in our educational system. People in Dothan and Montgomery and Millbrook and Ozark and Enterprise who are in the best position to make decisions as it relates to their children's education aren't able to, because our U.S. Department of Education is handing down these unfunded mandates. And I absolutely believe that we need to start shrinking it down, and I think that's the most important thing that we can do. I believe that education should be child-centered and parent-driven. The choices as it relates to our child's education should come straight from the home, and then the teachers and the local school boards ought to be able to implement what's best for our children, not some government bureaucrat sitting in Washington who doesn't understand the needs of our community. And then we can go back to the question before when we talk about our tax code. We just said that there was $500 billion in compliance costs alone. If we can get to a real place of tax reform, we can certainly start to shrink the size of the IRS. We just hired 16,000 more employees to the IRS just to implement the health care bill. The health care bill, which, by the way, the health care bill has absolutely nothing to do with health care reform and everything to do with government takeover in our lives. But these are 2 examples of where we can start, but let me tell you, the answer is endless. And what I've done on the Montgomery City Council is opposed wasteful spending on more than one occasion. And I will tell you this, I was proud to support a budget last year where we cut $9 million out of the budget and put $3 million away in the reserve, and we did it all without raising one single tax. My friends, it can be done. It can be done if you have the willingness and the strength to stand up against wasteful spending. And we need to elect someone to represent us in Congress that has the experience to stand up against wasteful spending. They spend and spend money that we do not have, and they are leaving an unbelievable debt for our children and our grandchildren. So there is a lot of wasteful spending that we absolutely need to root out and make the appropriate change.